Hi everybody, this is Ben Colby, Teen Librarian at Enoch Pratt. I'm working in MakeCode Arcade today, arcade.makecode.com. And this is the level 1 video for creating a dungeon-style, Zelda-style crawler. So let's call this the Legend of Zorda. We could start by creating a sprite first. I want to start with a tile map. So that's under Scene, and I'm going to draw a tile map. So I already know I want it to be extra wide. 16 by 16 is not very big. I'm just going to change that to 32 by 16. That's fine. And then I'm going to pick something for the walls. Under Dungeon, how about this one? And I'm just going to drag across the outside. It's okay if it's a little bit sloppy. Okay, so I'm going to have well, let's do this first. I'm going to have a stairs where we start, and I'm going to have a different kind of stairs where we finish. And that can be up here. So in between, we want to create kind of a maze. Oh, shoot, that was in Dungeon. It was this one. So here's a nice little starting room. We want to create some directions that are not the right way. So like this is not the right way. This is the right way. And then that can go up. And then let's do another misdirection. So the question is, oh, no. So I'm going to give you another choice here. And you have to go this way to find the stairs. Except, yeah, that's pretty good. I want to make sure everything is too wide. Sometimes people get stuck if they're one wide. Pretty good. I'm also going to fill the ground with something. And it doesn't matter too much. I kind of like these things, so I'm using the fill tool. That looks good. Now I'm going to add to my dungeon I'm going to add some monster spawning caves. So, nope, not filling, using the pencil tool. So there's a monster cave, there's a monster cave. We can just put them right in the middle of the path. And let's do some special ones right here, like 5 of them, because that is the guard point for the treasure room, which is over here. All right, so let's also add another spot where coins are going to spawn. I'm just going to use this diamond shape. And there's a special reward for going down that hallway. So coins are going to randomly spawn on top of these tiles. And there's going to be a certain number of coins that you need, I think, before you can get to the next level. So if you get past all the monsters at the end, you have this special treasure room. Pretty happy with that. And now I'm just going to create walls. So I have to actually highlight the wall tool and just drag across everything that you want to be a wall. And I'm going to leave these spawn points alone. Those are not walls. You can walk over them. And I think I will be done for now with my tile map. This is obviously something that you could take days adding details to. But I think I'm almost there, and I just went off the end, so I'm going to undo that. And I should put another, well, I guess it doesn't matter. Very good. So I've highlighted all of my wall areas. And the tile map should pop right up here. Great. So let's go ahead and start by creating our sprite. And just to keep it all organized, I'm just going to start right off putting it in a function. Create player. This is kind of something you should always do, I think, just to keep organized. So what do? We set my sprite. Well, let's rename it. Let's call it the player sprite. And that's going to be something. I'm just going to grab something from the gallery. Let's use one of the people. Let's use this one. Sprite of kind player. We are going to, it's under scene where you want to place a sprite on a tile. Place my sprite on top of random tile. Okay. Place player sprite on top of random stairs. And there's only one of those. So the fact that it's random doesn't matter. So now we have a spawning point. What else? We want to go to the controller, move the player sprite with buttons. And right there I can see the velocities. I'll change those later if I want to. And then we're going to make the camera follow the player. This is all pretty standard for most games. So it's under camera, all the way at the end, camera follow sprite, player sprite. So that kind of gets us moving here. Why isn't... Oh, because I haven't called... So here's a problem. I haven't created the player. Why? Because it's all in the function, but I didn't call the function. You have to actually run the function. And this would have to happen after the tile map is created. Otherwise, it won't know what to do with this command. Great, so now we just spawned on the stairs. And I can move in the map, and I'm getting stopped by the walls. So that's great. I want to animate the player so that we are walking, and I want us to be able to face 4 different directions. So let's do this in a set of variables. There are different ways to handle this, but let's create some Boolean variables, meaning logic variables, true-false variables. The first one is going to be called facing down. Set facing down to, well, it's going to be true or false, and I can grab a true or false in logic. Set facing down to true. And I'm going to keep, all right, so I need a new one, new variable facing right. Set facing right to false to begin with. And this is how we're going to keep track of which way we're facing, which is also going to affect which way our weapons go. I think I want to fire an arrow. I want to shoot a bow and arrow at the enemies. And so we're going to need to check which way we're pointing. So that's why we need variables to keep track of this. I'm going to rename this one to facing left, which is going to start off as false. I'm going to make the last one facing up, which is going to be false to begin with. Great. And let's see. I am going to animate the characters walking. So on button pressed. We're moving it with the buttons. So I don't have to choose the A button here. I also have directional buttons. So let's start with left. On left button pressed, first thing I'm going to do is change my variable. Set the facing left variable to true. Set the others to false. And this is going to look a little, it's going to seem cumbersome, like it's too much, but it's a lot of copying and pasting. It really isn't that much work. So we're setting face left to true, and we're setting all the other ones. Oh, do I not have, oh goodness. Facing right. So now I have down, up, left, right. Let's do them in the same order. Down, up, left, and right, except in this case, left is the only one that should be true. Whew, okay, so what do? We animate. I'm going to animation, the first thing. And I know that I'm facing left, so I'm going to animate the player sprite to look like what? Well, I think we already have built-in animations for this one. There they are. Yep, so I have walking left, walking right. Cool, so I'm going to pick the walk left animation. And yep, and so now that I turned left, that's good. And I'm just going to go ahead and loop it forever. Do I want it to animate faster? Let's see. Yes, I want you to walk faster than that. It looks pretty good, but I'm going to drop it to 200 milliseconds. So this is great. I think this is all we need on our left side button. So I'm going to copy and paste that entire loop and say, let's do the right side next. Well, facing left is going to be false in this case. Facing right is going to be true. And we keep the animation block, but the only thing is I'm going to go back to my gallery, and now we're facing right. So let's find the right-facing animation. There it is. If you picked a different sprite here, by the way, there's built-in animations for pretty much all of them. So now we have the right-facing animation. Let's just test and see how that looks. I'm going left, and that looks great. And I'm going right, and that looks great. So you see what I mean about the copying and pasting. The first one was the most difficult. Copying this group again, and now it is an up button pressed. Well, we set facing right to false, we set facing up to true, and we pick the right animation. So it's facing up, this one. And finally, down. If the down button is pressed, we set facing down to true, we set facing up to false, and we animate walking down, which is right here, or walking front is what it's called. Good enough. Let's test it, make sure that our animations are looking great. Right side, great. Up, great. Left, great. Down, great. Yeah. So we really have great looking animation on this character right now. Okay, let's, the next thing, yeah, let's shoot an arrow. So actually, I'm gonna need another one of these button loops. And this is gonna be A, which is also the space bar, by the way. So what do I do here? I'm gonna delete everything. Oh, okay, deleting everything. All right. So I need to create an arrow when the A button is pressed. So I would do that under sprites and projectile. Set projectile to projectile from sprite. It's the first one. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call this an arrow. And I can draw the arrow, arrow from player sprite. And let's draw the arrow. I want it to be a lot smaller. And actually, I'm gonna pull up my player again, just so I can see the relative size. I don't want the arrow to be really small or really big. So that's my player. It's a 14 by 16. Okay, so let's see. I want this to be a lot skinnier, only 3, and I want the the height of it to be roughly half of the height of the character, 3 by 8. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and erase what's there. So let's see, I want a light colored arrow because the ground is dark. So let's start with white. There's the point, and we're gonna have the shaft, and then let's see, let's make the shaft of the arrow blue. I think that's a pretty good looking arrow. Let's see what it looks like when we fire the arrow. I'm hitting the space bar to do this. That's a good looking arrow. It's just going down and to the right, and it doesn't follow the direction that I'm facing. No problem though. How do we check to see? Well, we're going to do an if loop, because what happens depends on the state. All right, this is where these variables come in very useful. If facing up, or you could say if facing up equals true, but since this is facing up is a true-false variable, so if is a loop that's taking a true-false argument. So actually, all I need to do is put the variable right in there because it's already a true or false value. Okay, if we are facing up, then I set the arrow to projectile, and I want it to fly up. So there's no x velocity, and there will be a y velocity. Let's call it 100, and I think it needs to be negative 100. And if you're having trouble typing that in like me, one thing you can do is drag the slider down to minus. It's important that we want this to be a minus velocity because that'll make it shoot up. In MakeCode Arcade, the y direction points down. So if you give it a positive y velocity, it's shooting down. Negative y velocity, it's going up. So now, yep, and that's if I'm facing up. It will shoot the arrow that way. If I'm facing down, it won't do anything. That's great. So let's just put a bunch of extra steps on this if loop. I think 4 is enough. So else if the variable is going to say if we're facing down, then let's set our arrow to, oh, you know what? Do we want to create special variables for the arrows? No. Nope, I'm just going to rough it, and I'm going to just create what I need upside down. So that is going to look like that. Yeah, well, you get the picture. So let's see. That one is gone, that one is gone, that one is gone, that one is gone. That one is gone, and that one is gone. So that's the facing down version. I think it's a mirror image. You can use code to make a mirror image, but not today. Okay, so let me test real quick and make sure that my up arrow is working and my down arrow is working. That's great. So let's do the left and the right very quickly. And I think that'll be enough for the level 1 video here. And let's save the coin spawning and enemy spawning for part 2. Okay, so else if facing left, then we set the projectile to a projectile that is, instead of 3 by 8, I guess it has to be 8 by 3 in terms of dimensions, and I can just erase this. So let's see, I had 3 clicks, and I can just zoom out to make sure I get all this. Right, so it was like this, I think, and then there was a blue stick going down the middle. So this would be my left arrow. And this time I want a 0 y velocity, and I would want a negative x velocity. And then for the last one, I can just say else. I don't need another else if, because if it's not facing up, down, or left, then it must be facing right. And I don't even need to check to ask if it's facing right. Okay, so let's erase just the white parts. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And that better be a positive x velocity. Okay, four directions of arrows should work. Okay, so I'm walking around and I'm firing arrows up, good. Firing arrows right, good. Firing arrows down, firing arrows left. Awesome. I do want to add one more thing to the arrow. I want one more thing to be true. And I'm going to go ahead and put another if loop around all of the other if stuff, because I only want to fire the arrow if there's not already an arrow on the board. I only want to allow one arrow on the board. So how do we do that? We need to create another variable, arrow list. And so we're going to set the arrow list at the beginning of this, because this is a check that we need to do first. I'm going to set the arrow list to an array of sprites, and I always forget where that one is. Array, it's under sprites, under life cycle, array of sprites of kind. And this would be projectile. And so what do we check? If the list of projectile sprites is greater than 1, then that means, or if it's greater, well, if it's 1, that means we can't shoot. If it's 0, we can shoot. So we have an array length up here, length of array. This is getting a little advanced, but it's the last thing for today. Length of arrow list, if that is 0. If the length of the array of the arrow list is 0, then we can fire an arrow. An array is basically a list. So I think that's exactly what it should look like. Let's test that. I'm trying to fire another arrow, but I can't until the other one crashes. Also, I want my movement to be slower than the arrow, even though right now it's exactly the same. So I'm going back to the player function. Instead of moving with buttons 100, 100, I'm going to go 50 and 50. Let's try this now. Oh, I love that. Yep. That looks great. So it's kind of hard to shoot a lot of arrows, so you're going to have to really be careful how you shoot your arrows, especially if you're firing down a long hallway, because it's going to be there for a while, and you can't shoot another arrow until that one's gone. I love that. So I think in the part 2 video, we're going to add some coins spawning here, and we're going to add some enemies. But this is a pretty good start. Oh, before I go today, let's just review everything in this. So in the start menu, all I have is the tile map and the create player function. That includes creating the player, placing the player, creating these variables to see which way we're facing. And then I have a series of left, right, down, up, down button presses, which tell me I'm changing the variables to tell me which one is true and false. And then I'm going to animate in a certain direction. And then finally, I do that 4 times. And then finally, when my A button is pressed, I'm setting an arrow list to array of sprites. An array is a list. If the length of the array is 0, meaning there are no projectiles that exist, that's the only time that we can actually fire the projectile. And I have 4 things here in a big if loop. If the facing up variable is true, then we create the projectile a certain way with a certain image in a certain direction. and so on if we're facing down or left. And the last one, I didn't put anything because the only other choice is to face right, so you don't need to say anything. Okay, and that's it for part 1.